Oh, hey. It's nice to see you. Well, we made it. It's week 2, and I'm not proving to be a liar this time. Thank you. I know. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I didn't know if I had it in me, to be honest. Wasn't sure if I was gonna make it here or not, in front of the old doohickey. Thanks to everybody out there who's praying for my return. I really appreciate the spiritual warfare that you're engaged in for me. And for anyone who didn't think I was gonna make it back, go ahead and go in the and take hole and get out all the and because I'm not gonna deal with it. Today, we're gonna talk about black and white thinking. This is a term that I've used before and I probably will use again because it has come up so much in my life and has been such a helpful thing to understand. So I wanted to take some time and explain the term here because a lot of the things that I'm talking about on YouTube now are not things that occurred to me even a decade ago. So I decided to make a little series, maybe, I don't know, I'm always talking about series and shit, but I wanted to make some videos where I talk about these terms and lay out what I see and how I define them and how those definitions have helped me. A disclaimer for any of the terms that we're talking about. I'll try to let you know if there are professional definitions and professional approaches to these things, but they're largely going to come from my experience with these terms. But I will try to also be big picture enough and relate it to other parts of our lives because that's where it really helped me. So we're going to start with black and white thinking because I think it's one of the most profoundly embedded thought patterns that I received from Christianity. So let's start with its origin. You come into the world as a little baby and you're bendy and flexible and you don't know nothing, you just poop, eat, and sleep. One of the things that adult figures usually teach children is the difference between right and wrong. Of course, I think context matters, and I think most people would say that. So I'm not trying to come in here and be like, this is right and wrong. But what I do want to say is that most moral approaches have some sort of gray area. Through a series of questions or a line of thinking, you get to this thing is right or this thing is wrong, but the wrong could be right in this scenario and the right could be wrong in this scenario. That's the gray area. Things sort of get wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey, or what does Doctor Who say? I think that's it. Wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey?
Wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey.
Now, I'm also not saying that there is no gray area in Christianity. However, if we think of Christianity as another moral approach, then what I'm proposing is that the little bit of gray space that exists within Christianity does not exist in a significant way. It is a system through which things are largely viewed as black and white, right and wrong. The problem with this black and white model, the model that I was taught and largely used for a long time, is that it doesn't really prepare you to go out into the world and take on multiple different contexts. For me, once I learned that there was a definitive right thing and a definitive wrong thing, life became an obsessive pattern of trying to figure out what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing. And because it was my primary moral system from the time that I was learning anything about the world, even after I left Christianity and decided this system is not for me, it still had all of that time to mature into a deeply held thought pattern and life pattern of mine. To understand this and unpack this further, I want to bring in the concept of heuristics. Heuristics are the mental models or the mental shortcuts that we create as pattern recognizing mammals so that we don't expend too much energy on solving problems, on figuring out what's happening in the world around us. If we've encountered this thing before, it's much more efficient to reference what you already know about the scenario than to create a whole other model. The more practice this model gets or this shortcut gets, the more solidified it becomes in your life. Our bodies and our minds have evolved to be energy saving and efficient so that we can survive longer and don't just die as soon as we meet the first trauma of life. So when you're taught, especially from a young age, that this is the way to view the world, it becomes really, really cemented in your brain because it has all of those years, especially childhood years, where your brain is buzzing and creating these pattern recognition models, having neurons fire as you solve problems in the world around you, which creates a little bridge there between those neurons. So now it's easier for that path to be used again and a little bit harder for a new path to be created. So it takes a little bit of willpower to get out of the pattern. Now you can imagine again that if a pattern has been established at a really early age and you live for a couple decades with that pattern, even if you say, I'm done with this pattern, it's still going to want to show up. Your brain is still going to want to solve similar problems in similar ways, using the same heuristics, using the same mental models and mental shortcuts. So how does this show up in life? Outside of trying to figure out, what is perfectly right and what's perfectly wrong, where else does this heuristic show up? For me, it showed up fucking everywhere. I have learned that if I'm ever in any kind of distress or anxious about life or even just a specific scenario, one of my first places to check in with myself is with that black and white mental pattern. It can show up in relationships. It can show up in your career path. It can show up at work. It can show up with your friends. It can show up in the way that you present yourself in every social situation. It can get very deep. And something that's important to know as well is that it doesn't always show up through a Christian lens. So even if you learned how to relate to the concept of right and wrong from a Christian perspective, it doesn't necessarily always show up as this is not a Christian thing to do. Does that make sense? I think it might be intuitive to assume that if you were taught it in Christianity, the way that it would come back up is in judging yourself that this is a sinful thing to be doing, even if you don't believe in sin anymore. And I think certainly it can show up like that, but even more so, it shows up in very subtle ways. I'll give you an example from my life. When I started dating, I approached relationships and dating as a way to find your marriage partner. In Christian circles, dating is a very practical practice. It's not about having fun and doing stuff with each other. It's about finding your marriage partner, first and foremost. Ideally, a God-loving and God-fearing person who challenges you in your walk with God. So this was my naive approach as I entered into the dating pool. And of course, intellectually, I could say, all relationships are going to have their disagreements. I thought it was something that would just come to you, that would just make sense. I mean, really, I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I was like, maybe if I read the Bible enough, I'll understand how to get out of a disagreement with my partner. But basically, I was going into the dating arena thinking that God's perfect match was going to be there for me. And it's taught as such an important thing to find a godly person to be with. So I thought surely I will know, I will feel that this is correct, and I will feel that something or another, this is God we're talking about. This is surely there must be some kind of extra feeling about a person when they are God's plan for me. Surely it wouldn't be difficult. I mean, come on. I think everybody, regardless of religious affiliation, would say, yeah, marriage is going to come with its challenges. And anybody who's been married, of course, would look at me then and be like, wow, what a fucking idiot. But this is the sneaky way, that mental model, that mental shortcut, gets in to your life and fucks with shit. I would go into a panic every time things got rocky in a relationship because I thought something was wrong. And instead of being able to recognize communication tools that could help us, support tools like therapy that could help me, or anything else like that, I instead went to a place of, oh no, this isn't right for me. As I continued down this path before realizing what was going on in my life, I found myself waiting for that feeling that I was waiting for when I first started dating. And after self-sabotaging myself in multiple scenarios, I finally realized it was the black and white thinking I had adopted from Christianity that was making me believe that my relationships were not right for me. Something was off, this thing was bad, I'm unsure of myself and of this relationship. Truly, that gets down to the heart of what this kind of black and white approach leads to. It leads to you doubting yourself, doubting your ability to make a decision about your life and be okay with that decision and be okay with the challenges that come from that decision. You know, when you're handed the rules that are pretty much a basic yes, do this, no, don't do that, or this is the right way to be saved and every other way is fucking wrong, or this is the true God and everything else is not real, or this is the one way that you get into heaven and everything else will lead you to hell. Like, in terms of consequences and the stakes in those things, that's like no fucking joke to be carrying around as a child. And not only that, but you had years and years, decades, for those patterns to solidify themselves in your behavior and in the way you problem solve and in the way you approach the world. So if you're in a relationship and you start to feel like this isn't right, I don't know what's wrong, I can't quite tell, I'm getting really anxious about it, I would just check your black and white thinking. Are you pinning subconsciously all those stakes to making the right decision in this moment? On some level, are you thinking to yourself that if I choose this wrong, something horrible will happen? If I make the wrong decision, it'll all go to shit. Or if you're having a slump in your career and it's something that you used to love and you're no longer sure if you want to be there, but you have no idea what to do about it, you might want to check your black and white thinking, because it sounds like you're staking the rest of your life and who you're going to be on this one decision now. If you're thinking of starting a new side project or a passion project or a new hobby or anything, and you're afraid that you're going to fuck it up and embarrass yourself or completely lose all hope of accomplishing your goals, then you might want to check your black and white thinking, because you're probably making it harder on yourself than it needs to be. Now, I'm not saying this is going to solve all your problems, but for me, this was one piece of the puzzle that helped me start to tackle a lot of the general anxiety I had about life. If you're wondering if this kind of thinking applies to you, since it's not always so obvious how it shows up, I have a few questions you can ask yourself to see how it might be showing up for you. Number one, you can start with if you even learned this kind of thinking. Were you taught that the decisions you made personally were going to have a global effect, or were going to have an effect on the salvation of someone else's life, or were going to have an effect on where you ended up for eternity, then you are a ripe candidate for black and white thinking. The reason is because all of those approaches, being responsible for your soul in an eternal space, something that we cannot comprehend, teaches you that even the littlest thing that could take you away from bliss could put you right into the worst misery you could imagine. Being taught that the entire world needs your help and needs to hear the good word of Jesus from you is an impossibly large task for any religious organization to worry about, let alone one little kid, one person even. And being taught to evangelize to your friends at school because their blood will be on your hands if you don't try to save everybody around you, tells you that you have to approach life with a white-knuckled grip around everyone who's around you so that you can drag them to heaven with you to make sure that, one, they don't end up in hell because you care about them, and two, it's not your fault that they ended up in hell. You learned that oversharing your opinion and trying to help a person is more beneficial for them than just listening to the problems that they have and trying to support them as a separate human being who's having a separate experience from them. Question number 2. Am I often in some kind of distress over the situations I'm in and the relationships I'm in? And number 3, am I often in distress over situations and relationships that I'm in, but I don't know why? I have found these 3 categories, or 3 questions, often relate to a person who's having a hard time making a decision and feeling okay with it. Black and white thinking eventually leads to, I think, a generalized anxiety about the world. Because when you're taught how to relate to the concept of right versus wrong through a lens like Christianity, which tells you right and wrong come from outside of you, you never believe that you have the right answer, that you can make the right decision. When your entire structure of decision making is based entirely on finding out what someone else thinks is right or wrong, you never develop a sense of how to make a right or wrong decision for yourself. And you certainly don't develop the processing tools to help you find new solutions to scenarios instead of reverting back to the same old freak out pattern of believing that something is wrong. So once you recognize that this is a pattern that shows up in your life, the way to get out of it is by practicing not going into the pattern. So you have to recognize when it shows up, first of all, which is difficult. I'm not gonna lie. For me, it showed up when I was anxious. So you would think that, this would be a really good sign, really obvious sign. But when you get into that cycle of like something's wrong, blah blah blah, spiraling, it's really hard to like get out of that on your own. And that's where support from people around you and from therapists and things like this really help. But if you can work on stopping yourself before you're in this spiral and diverting your attention to something else that you can focus on, then you can avoid that circle and start to build another mental model. Now, this isn't a cure-all, and it's definitely not easy. It's not easy to stop yourself from going into the familiar. Even if we say we don't want to have that general anxiety, it can often be an easier path to go back to what we know than to forge a new path into the unknown. We're going to feel unsafe when we catch ourselves and stop ourselves from going into that loop, which is another reason why getting support is really helpful, because it can be scary to try to go out and create a new way of being in the world. I mean, if you're like me, you started with black and white thinking. So there's a very deep groove in that mental model. And it's just gonna take time, and it's gonna take practice with you noticing yourself in the spiral, before the spiral, after the spiral. Unfortunately, this isn't just like, oh yeah, I do have black and white thinking. All right, I'm done with that, I guess. I really wish it was, but unfortunately it's not. We have to teach ourselves that it's okay and it's safe to be different in the world, that it's okay to go down a new path, that it's okay to make decisions because you want to, and that it's okay to make decisions without knowing if it's the right or wrong answer, without knowing exactly where it's going to lead you, without knowing if it's going to be the best possible path for you. Christianity promises such an amazing reward at the end of it all if you only just stay on the right path. But that's not what life is. There's not necessarily a reward just waiting for you after we die or at the end of your life. It takes conscious effort to create things in this world. And getting stuck in black and white thinking is just one way of stopping yourself from creating, because it's hard to create and it's scary to create, and it's scary to step out and be like, here's my thing, because people will be like, that thing is shit, and you're like, oh God, my thing is shit. I knew this was the wrong choice. I knew I should have just stayed not doing my thing. I mean, these are the stories we tell ourselves every day. So we know the stories well, and we repeat them in our heads all day, every day. So it's gonna take some work, and it's gonna be uncomfortable, but you can rest assured knowing that it will change. It can change and it will change. You don't have to have that generalized anxiety if it is coming from this source. You can just choose what you choose because you choose it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I want to reiterate that this is not meant to be a blanket statement. I'm not trying to say this is where all anxiety comes from. I'm just trying to point out where black and white thinking, as presented by Christianity, tends to take a toll on one's life. I'm thinking I'll make a few more of these, you know? Maybe next one I'll talk about how to make powerful decisions, because that's one that I think Christianity trains right out of you. Let me know if that would be interesting to you or anything else you'd like to hear about. I'm happy to expound upon any of the terms I have used today or in the nithers. If you want to support me, you can find my Patreon and other social media links down in the description box. And I'll catch you next time.